Spring practice week number 2 is underway at Ohio State. This is the Podcast Daily. It is Monday. Bill Landis, Jeremy Birmingham, and Austin Ward joining me as we get ready for a very busy week with the Buckeyes. Multiple days of availability, multiple position groups to talk to, pro day on Wednesday. Bill, who's fired up?
I'm pretty fired up. It's a loaded week. That's the I guess the effect of squeezing all of this into 4 weeks instead of, I guess, like 6 weeks like we normally do, is that it feels like it's kind of nonstop, almost to the point where it feels like we're in the season already, which I don't know that I love that part of it, but certainly is nice to have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, it wouldn't be so bad to spread it out a little bit, but it's coming fast and furious, and we got 4 straight days of content coming your way. So I know that Berm is also plenty fired up.
I'm always fired up, ready to go. Super excited. It starts on Monday. We've got, obviously, press conference with Ryan Day, Matt Patricia, Brian Hartline. That should be interesting. Tuesday, Larry Johnson. Wednesday, pro day. I mean, we get to see all the guys come back and watch them put it on the show and watch all the NFL scouts in attendance actually be only there to watch Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs walk around. And then Thursday, we got 2 other position groups, right? Tight ends and
linebackers and tight ends. So pumped up for that
week.
All right. So what are we hoping to learn? What questions are on your mind? We got both coordinators and Ryan Day later today, which is Monday. Bill, what are you hoping to find out?
Yeah, a few things. Maybe one that's like kind of player centric, and we have talked about him a lot, but Austin Saraveld being one of the Iron Buckeyes was like, that's interesting. There were 3. It was Austin Saraveld, Sonny Styles, and of course, Jeremiah Smith, because why not be the hardest worker on your team when you're also the most talented player in college football? So good for him. But Austin's the one that stood out to me. And I guess it'd be a question more for Ryan Day, and I suppose for Brian Hartline, less so for Matt Patricia, although I guess he could weigh in if he wanted to. Like how we should be thinking about Austin Saraveld in terms of his role on this team. We've made note of the fact that he's been first guy out with the offensive line at left tackle in the 2 hours of practice that we've seen. And I don't know that, Ethan Onyana was going to start for this team. I'm not like changing my stance on that at all, but I think some people were a little more open to the idea of like Phillip Daniels perhaps being less of a slam dunk to start than Ethan Onyana. And I'm not necessarily saying I'm there yet either, but I just want to be correct, I guess, in how I'm viewing Austin Saraveld. If he's at least doing what he's doing now on the field, and he was an Iron Buckeye in the offseason, and they're looking for leadership, and they're always looking for guys to like step up and kind of help make the team theirs in whatever way they can do that, then I'm going to take note of the fact that Austin Saraveld turned enough heads in winter workouts to get that distinction. So we like briefly just sort of touched on the idea that he was playing tackle with Ryan Day the last time we talked to him, but perhaps his role in this team, even if he's not a starter, stretches far beyond that in terms of its importance. So that is certainly on my mind heading into this week.
Yeah, like how important is that distinction? You know what I mean? Like Julian Fleming was an Iron Buckeye 2 years ago, and then basically had like 6 catches during the regular season, and now he still did a lot of very important things for the program and was still an instrumental part of the leadership group. But how much does it really mean? My thought, or one thing that's on my mind, it's maybe a bit more niche heading into Monday, especially getting a chance to talk to Ryan Day and Brian Hartline, is how a player like Sam Williams-Dixon or Bryson Rogers a year ago, how the relationship changes when a player enters the transfer portal and then comes back. Like, is there a rebuilding of trust that's required? Like, how do you move forward with that player? Because I mean, we talked about running backs twice in the last week, and we didn't even bring up Sam Williams-Dixon's name. And it's not necessarily because we forgot about him; it's because he just hasn't felt relevant to the discussion at the position. Meanwhile, TC Caffey is being brought up and stuff like that. So I'm just interested to see what Sam Williams-Dixon's role is going to be for this team this spring, and if it's likely that his situation rebounds as positively as Bryson Rogers did, or if this is just like a delaying the inevitable and he's just going to re-enter the portal in the spring because he didn't really have a chance to go anywhere after the season ended because of the timing of it also. I'm just fascinated in this new era of roster management, how you handle what are a situation that's clearly going to happen more and more, but also it is still, it's like a part of the game, but you also kind of still hate it.
Did his answer about that, Berm, do anything to make you believe he won't go? Because I was like, oh, he'll just go back in after spring ball's over. But him saying that he was listening to the wrong people, and then since then feels like he's taken more control of his own situation, makes me believe that he won't necessarily leave after spring practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's encouraging. But if we do a little deep dive and go back into Sam's recruitment 3 years ago, when he committed to Ohio State and Tony Alford, like he started planning to take secret trips to Kentucky and other spots. And like this was a discussion with him then, like you cannot do these things now. You have to change who you're trusting, change your circle of trust. And I don't think that that's changed yet. So I'm hoping that it does. I like Sam a lot. We've got a good relationship. I hope that he takes this opportunity seriously because it's right there in front of him. But when there are coaches around the country who you dealt with in recruiting that are still sliding into your DMs and still trying to tell you things.
Wonder who that could be.
I'm not going to name names, but I mean, there's certain.
I think you already did.
I'm not here to. People can put pieces together however they want, but I think
You
at
should
some
drill
point
down to the marrow of that one to get to the heart.
you have to ask yourself, like, how much do you really want this? And if because Sam Williams-Dixon and James Peoples, both of them were not in a great position a year ago when they were told last year that Tony Alford was leaving. You know, like it's a very difficult position that they were put in. They were not recruited by Carlos Loughlin. When Carlos Loughlin got there, I don't think he gave two craps about Sam Williams-Dixon and to a lesser degree James Peoples last year because he couldn't really spend that much time investing into them when you had Quinshon and Trevion that you had to get ready for the season. So like if you were the fifth running back on that list last year, you were not getting a bunch of time with Carlos Loughlin. That's a fact. So I don't even know if they're, where their relationship is. I think ultimately will determine what Sam does this spring, but it's encouraging. Yes, Bill, to hear him say, I messed up. I need to take accountability for that. Like that's at least a sign of growth.
It felt to me like it was, I don't know. He wasn't really fully bought into the idea of going into the transfer portal because in the conversations that were being had in December, Berm was like, well, he's going to be done with Ohio State. He's not going to stick around through the playoff run. And then the very next day you saw him back on the field, sticking with Ohio State through practice and going through it. It's like, I think if he had been 100% locked in on finding somewhere to go in December and January, he could have done so. So he's the one that ultimately chose to delay or shorten that process of looking for somewhere else to go, which to me, even at that time, made me think, well, maybe he does realize the situation is pretty good at Ohio State, and he's not single-minded in his belief that he must leave. Now, it took a while to resolve itself with that decision and pull his name back out of the portal and return to Ohio State. But and again, I don't want to make any predictions about what's going to happen on April 13th once this spring season is over and the portal is back open again. But like, it just combining what he did and what he has said now, it doesn't feel like he wants to leave. Like he wants to be at Ohio State. Now, I could be wrong about that, but when Bill says, did that change things? What he has done and what he has said suggests to me that he wants to be at Ohio State.
Oh, I agree. And it's funny. Sam told me back in December he was going to enter the portal and told me he was not sticking around. And then I saw him on the sideline of the Texas game. I'm like, oh, you're still here. And then
there was one of those practices, and Bill and I were out there. I think you were at home. It was like, I thought Berm said that Sam Williams-Dixon wasn't going to be here. Like, isn't that him right there? Isn't he going through that drill with Carlos Loughlin? He's still here. Yeah.
Guy loves ball, man.
Yeah.
I
don't blame him for that. I don't blame him for any of that. And they can make whatever decisions they want, what is best for their future.
I just think that there's a lot of kids, I don't want to interrupt, but I think a lot of kids who are under the impression that things are not going to change when you become a player versus a recruit. And sometimes that adjustment period of like, hey, the coaches are actually no longer recruiting you. They're actually trying to coach you. Like that is a wake-up call that not a lot of kids are truly ready for. I was talking to a pretty highly regarded freshman on the roster a couple weeks ago, and even he said, like, it's way different than I thought it was going to be. And this is a player that's being counted on for playing time, and they're like still eyes wide open, like, holy moly, this is way harder than I anticipated. And so for a kid that comes in underranked, Sam Williams-Dixon was at the time, the one of 3 running backs in the recruiting class with Jordan Lyle and James Peoples. He was somewhat forgotten then, and then he becomes a casualty of a coaching change in the middle of spring. Like, I understand fully why he would have maybe felt like he didn't have a place, but if Carlos Lachlan and Ryan Day are fighting for you to stay on the roster in December and January, then I think you owe it to yourself and your family who's in Columbus, like an opportunity to say, hey, I'm gonna stick this out and see at least what I can get out of it.
Yeah. And his situation last year was not the same as James Peoples with Carlos Lachlan. James was talking about that during his press conference last week, that Carlos Lachlan had been recruiting him when he was at Oregon, that he'd been down to see him in Texas. So like, they had a built-in relationship. I don't think that was the exact same as Lachlan and Sam Williams-Dixon. So that's a notable difference, and we'll see how that all plays out moving forward. Bill, where else will you go on Monday to get some information?
I'm interested in like Matt Patricia's process for figuring out what this is all going to look like and what he thinks the timeline of that might be. And honestly, even if there's anything you could take, because I guess like that's less of a fact-finding mission in the NFL, right? You sort of know who you're paying. Oh, I guess in college, you know who you're paying the most now too. But you know who you've drafted highly and like targeted in free agency, and the rosters are smaller and it's just a smaller pool of players. I think you have a pretty good idea, maybe even like through like OTA season in the spring and stuff and early summer, what your defense is going to look like. And it's not to say that like Ohio State's defensive depth chart is like open season and they're searching for a lot of stuff. But I'm thinking about it like some of the things we talked about from a positional standpoint, like what they're going to do up front in terms of perhaps being a little more multiple. Some of the stuff that Ryan Day said the other day about, you know, they played safeties at the nickel in the past, and maybe it'll be more like they're playing 3 cornerbacks this year. Like, as Matt Patricia is just like moving around all these position groups and, you know, meticulously taking all those notes that he takes with the pencil that he carries around, how he's going about the business of trying to figure out exactly what this is going to look like. And not that he has to know, you know, on March 24th what it's going to look like, but maybe when he feels like he might have to know what that looks like, because he's got fresh eyes, which I find interesting. I know that the continuity of the defensive staff was important to Ryan Day, but to have all those guys at the positions back within a guy overseeing everything, approaching it with kind of a fresh point of view, I think could lead to some interesting discoveries as they try to figure out exactly what the defense is going to look like. So I'd like to ask Matt Patricia a little bit about his process of figuring that out.
I think it's this will not surprise anyone who listens to the podcast daily. And for me, it's like that's specific to the nickel. And Matt Patricia has already talked about this a little bit in the first press conference that he had, that there's going to be potentially more clearly defined roles and substitution packages and personnel groupings. And I think that'll obviously apply to nickel. And so it's more like not what's the depth chart there. I want to know like how many different options Matt Patricia is considering, like, because as you went out there and we said last week, the first unit was exactly how you would have thought it was going to look when Ohio State started practice. And Lorenzo Styles was in that role, but we've talked about Jermaine Matthews or Aaron Scott or Davison Igbinosun or you know, any number of other guys who could fit in there. Like how wide, how deep is that pool for Matt Patricia at nickel, and what does that mean? Because I don't think that if you asked him who's going to start at nickel, I think he would say, what personnel group are they defending? Because I think that's about how this is going to look. And so that's a not quite an adjustment, but the Jordan Hancock just never had to really come off the field in that role. And I'm not sure that that's how it's going to look with Matt Patricia.
Yeah, I don't know. There have been times in the past where I've wondered like how into the idea of sub packages Ohio State might want to get. And I suppose like that's more of an NFL thing than it is a college thing necessarily. But guess where Matt Patricia's been for the last 20 years. So maybe that'll be. It's mostly curious if he's even thinking about it that way. It's less so like, hey, can you give me your top 4 guys at nickel and like your top 4 guys at defensive end? It's more about I don't know, like ideology, I guess, about how he wants to utilize certain positions moving forward.
Yeah, I'm interested in whether or not there's guys that surprise people like Matt Patricia. Because that, as you said, like, you know who the first round picks are, you know who the high dollar guys are. But I'm curious if when a guy like Matt Patricia walks into a situation like that, fully intent on celebrating Caleb Downs and talking about Sonny Styles, and those are clearly the guys that you get drawn to initially. And Matt Patricia said in his first press conference, like, it's hard not to look for Caleb the first time as soon as he walks in the building to pick his brain on things. But I'm interested if there's other guys that have been like, oh, that's surprising. I wasn't expecting that because this guy didn't play before, like Leroy Roker or someone like that, who I think is someone we're never going to talk about until Caleb Downs is away from Ohio State for the NFL draft next year. But I think there's guys like that. And I'm also interested in it from Brian Hartline's perspective. Like, we've seen Ryan Day really struggle at times to just keep his eyes off the quarterbacks. And like, when you're the offensive coordinator and the play caller and you're trying to get a sense of the entire offense, how hard is it for Brian Hartline to evaluate what the running backs are doing versus what the offensive line is doing, when his natural instinct is going to always be to like coach the wide receivers. And I know you have to then trust your other position coaches to make sure that they have the right guys in place. But does Brian Hartline now have any authority to like see things or suggest things differently and how that's received? I'm just from a strictly holistic point of view, like how does this change the coaching staff when you promote a position coach to offensive coordinator? Because I think it's hard to ignore what you've done your whole life and pay attention to quarterbacks, for example.
It seemed like he was on the headset more during those 2 hours of practice that we watched last week than more than last year. And it felt more like spring of 2 years ago. I know that like Brian Hartline hates to get questions about the play calling and all that and what he's doing in practice. And he probably won't give great answers, but I think he's preparing for that life, Berm. And he also doesn't want to give up his baby. He's the best wide receivers coach in the country. He should be still devoting time and attention to that. It's a balancing act that I don't think like nobody ever enjoys it. You said that with Ryan Day before, and certainly Brian Hartline's going to have a hard time with that too. You're right.
Do you think like it's like in the program where the running back has to carry the football around all the time and like work on ball security? Like Brian Hartline just always has to have a headset on now, like all the time.
I think that's how you should ask him. He might be more willing to talk about it that way.
Yeah, like he's in line at Dunkin' Donuts and he's got his one headset on.
Yeah,
all in a
maybe.
I don't know what they have to offer at Dunkin' Donuts, but I assume it's something coffee related, and he's talking into the headset. Like, give me a coffee on 2. No.
Maybe Ryan Day is a Dunkin' Donuts guy. I'm assuming, being from New England, so maybe he's there just getting the order for the head ball coach.
Did you guys see that Ross Bjork tweeted that he may have located the famed headset from the national championship game?
Did not see that.
I did. I also read his replies.
Uh-oh.
That are all about men's. Everything he tweets, every reply is about men's basketball.
Oh, weird. The fan base cares about basketball now?
It seems like it. Yeah.
I think they want to care about it. That's the problem.
I think that's the biggest question. Do they want to care about it? Because I think if you want to care about it, then people need to go to the games, you know? And then, and I know it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg situation. Like, does the team have to be really good before people?
Chicken's got to score some points. You know what I mean?
4 points, chicken.
You got to put the egg in the basket.
That's right.
Anyway, what else are we excited about this week? What are you looking at, Austin, on Monday as we talk to these three?
Yeah, pretty interested as always in deciphering the nickel and how it's going to look in the secondary, because I think it'll still be a safety-driven defense for Ohio State. Wonder if Caleb Downs is like pissed off at the world that he was not an Iron Buckeye. I couldn't believe that was. Well, I mean, I'm not in there, so I don't know what the workouts look like, but I see him putting in more work than just about anybody else. So maybe that'll motivate him moving forward. I'm excited to hear again just what the process for. We'll have seen what they'll be through 5 practices when Larry Johnson talks, what the depth is looking like, get into more of the defensive tackle situation for Ohio State. It's all over the map, but because of the way it's compressed, like there's just a lot to get through throughout this week. And so it's a pretty open-ended question for me. It's like just whatever we can find out. And then by Wednesday, what's Will Howard's workout going to look like? I do think that Pro Day is going to be, it's always a circus. And you said people are going to be in there to talk to Caleb Downs. And I assume that Jeremiah Smith is going to run routes. And I'm going to bet that Will Howard looks a lot better throwing the football than he did at the combine with a bunch of random guys who I don't even know who they were. So I think, it's just a busy week. I'm excited for all of it.
Over Josh Simmons will work out on Wednesday.
He's
into anything in the combine.
NFL GMs in the building.
Oh,
6.5.
I don't know. It depends without knowing who else is holding its pro day that day. Yeah, I would say maybe under 6.5, but a good handful because there's a quarterback, and even if he's not a first round quarterback, like people want to get eyeballs on him.
Let's see. Hold on. I'm going to go to pro days to watch this week. Boise State on Wednesday, LSU on Wednesday, Ohio State on Wednesday, and that's it. So I bet you'll see a lot of folks.
They're going to be in Columbus. We'll be there for it as well. If you're planning out your content consuming on the podcast channel, we're not going to go straight to snap judgments after the press conference on Monday at the Woody. We're going to head over to Roosters for the live show, talk about what we learned from Matt Patricia, Brian Hartline, and Ryan Day with Bobby Carpenter and Justin Zwick. So make that adjustment. We'll be back, of course, with Tuesday morning's podcast daily, getting ready to hear from Larry Johnson and the defensive line. Pro Day Wednesday, trying to work on a few more 24-evers for you guys as well. So that's all coming this week. Multiple days of availability and 5 days of the podcast daily, just as you'd expect every single week. One down and on to the next one. For Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham, I am Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us on the Monday podcast daily. We'll see you later.